Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all well. Thank you for joining me on this live Cheeky Little Careers webinar, which is kindly being hosted in collaboration with Barbary SQE. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a minute, but since Barbary very kindly offered to share this space with me, I'd better tell you a little bit about Barbary first. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Barbary, they're a really well-known legal education provider and have historically specialised in helping candidates to navigate the bar examinations in the US in particular, and more recently, and I guess more relevant to you guys, is that they have also now announced the launch of a prep exam for the new SQE, which you'll have heard being mentioned in the legal press endlessly in the past few weeks, because it's a big bang in legal education. The courses they offer are very flexible. I don't really know that much about them, and it's not really my place to sort of go into detail about that, but we should be joined later by Anna, who works with Barbary, and she can field some questions on that if you do have anything relating to either the SQE or about the Barbary SQE prep programs. Anyway, that's the sales pitch done. Sorry, I had to do that. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and also about Cheeky Little Careers. So as you'll see, I trained I studied law at the University of Warwick and then joined Linklaters as a trainee solicitor, where I qualified into the firm's corporate practice. And my focus was really more on mergers and takeovers rather than the sort of fundraising side of corporate work, although I did do a little bit of that as well. And by that, what I mean is sort of companies floating on the London Stock Exchange. I decided that I didn't want to do law longer term, so ended up giving up practicing just shy of 3 years PQE to become a journalist on the Lawyer magazine. Did that for nearly 10 years, and that's how I became interested in all things careers related. And then about 7 years ago, decided to go off and do my own thing and launched my own consultancy, initially focusing on legal recruitment. And then more recently, I've shifted away from that to focus my attentions on career coaching and business skills training. My background in both law and journalism is remarkably helpful when talking about research, because for me, it's not the most sexiest topic that I present on, but as far as I'm concerned, it is fundamentally one of the, I would say, the biggest reasons why so many students fail to convert training contract applications into interview invites. And back in the day when I was applying for training contracts, it was really difficult to get hold of the relevant information because there was, I hate to say this, but I'm quite old, so we didn't have access to all the online content that students who are now sort of entering the profession or aiming to enter the profession are able to benefit from. Similarly, because back in the day, law firms would have far limited spend in terms of which universities they would go and do presentations at. I was lucky enough to attend presentations, but really my research centered around going to a couple of law firm talks and looking at hard copy versions of Legal 500, Chambers and Partners, etc. So there is so much information out there now, but it can be quite difficult to process, or actually difficult to know what to trust, what not to trust. And I don't know about you, but if any of you have been to events over the summer, you may walk away from that event or just slip away because you've probably done it from your bedroom from that event, or log off and think, that was really interesting, but I swear that trainee sounded much like the one that spoke at the event last week. And that's where I think attending events can actually be can have its limits, which I'll come on to later. Let me tell you quickly about Cheeky Little Careers. So we launched the website, or I launched it in collaboration with my brother, who's a banker at SocGen, in June 2020. And it's a little bit different to some of the other websites that you've probably been referring to, in that we're not really about gossip or news. It's more about skills and about encouraging our users and followers to take a more proactive sort of approach to career planning. And although our principal target audience are qualified lawyers, there's plenty of content on there that I think, hopefully students who are aspiring to break into the legal profession will find helpful, including content that will help you boost your commercial awareness, etc. So I've kind of skipped to the third bullet point to tell you back to the second bullet point. So that's really me with regard to introductions. You can ask me questions as we go along. You can use the Q&A function, or we can save some time at the end for you to ask me questions at that point also, because the presentation will probably last about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then, I'll allow plenty of time at the end for you to ask questions. I'm not here to test you. I'm not representing an employer. So this is a really safe space for you to ask questions that you perhaps feel a bit too awkward asking a graduate recruitment person or a trainee at a large-scale live event, which seems to be dominating the student itinerary at the moment. So as I've already touched upon, research is really, really important, because when I was applying for training contracts, because there wasn't much information available, I had a bit of a clumsy approach to identifying which firms I would apply to. And I was mostly influenced by which firms came to my campus. So Warwick is a bit of a hot destination for city law firms, and we were lucky enough to have quite a few firms visit us. And frankly, I just went along more for the nibbles rather than finding out what law firms did. But it certainly was very easily influenced by what they said to us. And of course, there's a bit of peer pressure. And really, the only way I had figured out whether a firm was going to be on my target list or not was going by something really quite basic, which is size. But by that, I meant how many people worked for that law firm. Because as far as I was concerned, size was everything. The bigger, the better, the more prestigious. But as I'm going to come on to explain to you, there are other ways of differentiating law firms. And it's not just about identifying employers. For those of you who are at the slightly earlier stages of your studies and where you haven't even figured out whether you want to be a lawyer or not, or if you do want to be a lawyer, do you want to be a solicitor or do you want to be a barrister? And are there any particular types of law that you're more interested than others? Do you want to go down the commercial route or the non-commercial route? So firstly, research should focus on, is law the right career choice for you? Okay. So that's more, looking into the actual sector in the broadest possible way. And next, once you've decided, yes, that is what I want to do, it's about developing a deeper appreciation and understanding of the different areas of law you can specialize in. And more precisely, what does being a lawyer actually involve? Because this is, again, a point that I missed completely when I was applying for training contracts. Because as far as I was concerned, it was all very global. It was high-profile deals that would be on the front page of the FT. You would work in teams, and it would be quite an international team of people I'd be working with, etc. But I didn't really sit down and ask myself, okay, so if I'm working on the advising a company that's floating on the London Stock Exchange, what does that involve on a day-to-day basis? And this is where, I think students would really benefit from paying a bit more attention. And then this is really the most vital bit of the jigsaw, which is to learn how you can tell firm A apart from firm B beyond the size and structure of what their training contract is. Because I know, talking to students, that you typically focus on how many trainees does the firm take on, are there any international secondments available, how many seats do you do? And I think that, to give yourself a bit of a head start when you start applying for vacation schemes or training contracts, it's quite important for you to be able to look beyond that. So using more sophisticated comparators, as I say, as to how firms can differentiate each other, you can differentiate them from each other. And the reason that's important, I'll come on to this, just a quick question that's come up. Okay, the question is, hi Husnara, do you have any tips on what to put in cover letters? I will come on to that because that's connected to why all of this is really important. So why is this all important? For the following reasons, okay? Because when you're looking, in order to develop a better understanding of employers, okay, as I said, I focus too much on the size of an organization or a firm, and that was it. And as I said earlier, just some of the basic differences between training contract structure, secondments, etc. But I think that there are three sort of areas to focus on. Firstly is the headline numbers and strategic priorities. And that includes headcount, number of offices, and year-end results. I'm going to come into more detail on that in a moment. The next is practice areas, sectors. Some firms actually focus on sectors more than practice areas. And then who are these sort of key clients? Are there any standout clients that this firm describes as the sort of trophy client? Who are the sort of key rainmakers? You know, that's a posh word for describing a star partner who brings in loads of work to a law firm. And then, of course, the work they've been advising on. And then, as well as working out what types of lawyer you want to be, it's really important to think about what sort of environment you want to be training in. And that's where looking at areas such as values and culture, and that will cover everything from people, and by that I mean, you know, what are the backgrounds of the people? How diverse do they look? And then other areas including their commitment to diversity and inclusivity. What are they saying to the legal press about, you know, the work they're doing to make sure that more women become partners, for example? What pro bono activities are they involved in? Have they made any pledges or commitments to climate change? Perhaps that's become a key sector for them because, as you'll have seen in the news, the government is prioritising sort of green businesses as a way of of helping the economy recover from the recession that we found ourselves in. So why is all of this important? Because there are lots of reasons you will need to know this information to even get your foot in the door. And by that I mean getting your application form taken seriously by the graduate recruitment team. And you're going to be, if you do your research really thoroughly, it means that you'll be able to answer the following training contract questions, which come up again and again and again and again. Okay. So firstly, why commercial law? Okay. On the face of it, it sounds really, really basic. And when I talk to students about this, they often come up with quite generic reasons. But imagine if you can link it to the clients that the firm represents, or a recent piece of work that the firm has been involved in, or because of the fast-paced nature of the work, because you listened to a trainee speak at a recent event who talked about their involvement in a high-profile, fast-moving piece of disputes work. Okay, so think about commercial law. Then the classic, why do you want to join our firm? And what differentiates us from our competitors? So you're going to be able to give a far more robust answer to that question if you know quite a lot of detail about what that firm stands for, what is it prioritizing in 2021, what is it saying about its people, what are its people saying about it, okay? And then you apply the same research process to firms that they would see as competitors. And I'll help you identify or, work out where to look for who a law firm's competitors are, okay? And then finally, by doing your research and your homework and the sort of background prep work, you can then do a much better job answering the question that probably sends shivers down more students' backs than anything, which is all those commercial related questions. Okay, so commercial awareness. So the classic one might be on an application form is, can you describe a recent news story that you've been following? Okay, now there are loads to choose from, but what would really get your answer noticed is where you've linked a piece of news or a piece of business related news to something that is going to put the firm you're applying to at an advantage or at a disadvantage, or that's going to have quite a, you know, overarching impact on the legal sector more broadly. So without that background knowledge, there's a risk that when you answer those three questions in whatever order, that the matching process between what you want and what you're after and what the firm can offer you becomes a bit skewed. And by that, what I mean is that I was talking to a student relatively recently who had decided that they wanted to apply for training contracts, and they submitted an application form to Clyde & Co. Okay. Now, Clyde & Co. do litigation. That's one of their sort of well-known practice areas. But what they don't do in London is much litigation that involves personal injury work. But what that student was doing was using some experience they had gained in personal injury and made that a significant feature of their motivations for going into law. Can you see why that's a significant mismatch? Because what this student is doing is telling Clyde that they want to be a, you know, specialist in personal injury work. And Clyde's graduate recruitment team is thinking, hang on a minute, this student clearly does not understand what our firm is really about. We're an international law firm, you know, which is well known in cross-border litigation with some insurance work, some shipping litigation, et cetera, et cetera. So had the trainee or the aspiring trainee gone off and done some really detailed research into what Clyde's priorities are as a business, then they could have made sure that their answer was a lot more tailored to what Clyde's could offer the student and what the student wants out of their training contract. So hopefully that helps. Okay, let's see, we've got a second question. I'm doing commercial law or co-curricular. Will this help in my application form? I'm going to park the questions that aren't specifically related to research for the end, because otherwise I'm going to end up running out of time to talk about the topic that I'm here to discuss with you this afternoon. But I promise you I will leave time at the end to discuss those. Okay, so we now know why it's so important to do research and why, you know, how it can help when completing training contract application forms. The next thing is, okay, where do you look? And I've broken it down into three easily digestible sort of chunks. So there's desk-based research, so stuff that anyone can do that doesn't involve having a conversation with a single person. So therefore, it's the most accessible form of research, because you can't say to me, well, Husnara, I can't possibly research a law firm because I don't have any contacts in the legal sector. Doesn't matter. This is easy to access information. A lot of it is available for free, and provided you know where to look, because in fact, there's so much information, it almost becomes a little bit overwhelming. And you kind of think, I don't know where to start. And then you get bored and you lose interest. Or you get bogged down on one website and then don't have enough time to look at the rest of the the other relevant sources. Then you've got events, okay? As I said, it is a lot easier to attend events now because everything's gone online, and that's, I guess, one of the positive byproducts of the COVID pandemic and the fact that we're in lockdown, or the England is in lockdown. The disadvantage of events is that, as I've already highlighted, often the speakers have been briefed. You know, if you're attending or listening in on a panel of trainees sharing their experiences about working in a particular firm, you may find that what they do is give a heavily sugar-coated version of what life as a trainee solicitor is like. Because graduate recruitment ain't going to thank them if they start giving a negative sort of summary of their experiences. So you'll find that it's very positive, everything is amazing, and many of the trainees sound like the trainees that you listened to the week before. So that's why those events can have their limits, and they're not necessarily the best sources for developing that sort of sophisticated level of knowledge that I've touched upon earlier. That's where, frankly, desk-based research can be a bit more rewarding. That said, I would encourage you to go to as many events, because there are lots that you can attend that will enable you to refer to them when you actually complete the application forms. And it's always worth mentioning that you listen to a trainee speak, but that might not be the warts and all version of events that you need to hear about before you make a well-informed decision about whether to apply to that firm or not. And then the third piece, which straddles the networking, is that which straddles events is networking. And you'll find that some events that you'll be able to participate in will combine some networking and one-to-one conversations with, a panel discussion or a presentation or webinar of sorts. But the key with these events and networking is that on the back of those, you then try to set up the more, as many one-to-one conversations as possible, because that's where you've got the scope to do a bit more detailed digging around, so to speak. So let's look at desk-based research. Firstly, this is, obviously I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, but a law firm website is the best starting point, okay? But you need to go well beyond the actual graduate recruitment page. It's worth your while looking at the corporate website, which is the main website. And things to look for in terms of the sections will be press relations or media, and that's where you'll find the press releases. And within that, you may even find press releases about the firm. So that might involve a partner hire or the launch of a new office, or a press release concerning the year-end results that a firm's announced. Then you've got the more technical sort of content, which might be press releases or client alerts on recent trends or cases that the firm's been involved in, or it could be an update relating to the employment law sort of issues that are coming out on the back of the extended furlough scheme. Okay, I wouldn't get too bogged down on the technical sort of client alerts, because some of them can be a bit too complex. And I know when I was at your stage, I would struggle to fully understand them. But look for potential trends in terms of what are they talking about? Are they sending out lots of information about globalization or AI? Are they sending out lots of alerts about employment law? Because, that might suggest that this is quite a priority for the firm. Okay. And then I'm going to explain a bit more about sort of press releases and information regarding financial results in a separate slide, so I'll park that for a moment. Then you've got the social media feeds. Again, it's worth following the firm-wide social media account as well as the graduate recruitment, because the graduate recruitment, as far as I'm concerned, it's all a bit sort of like airy-fairy. It's all very lovely. But what I want for you to sort of get your sort of teeth sunk into is the more sort of corporate messaging, because that will give you a better idea on strategy, on the actual robustness of the business, how successful has been, shielding itself against the economic downturn, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, when you're looking at the press releases will obviously be the law firm's version of something that's happened. That's why you need to also look at third-party content. So that's where the directories come into play. So if you haven't already heard of them, you've got Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners are the two main ones. And it's worth flicking through those, and you can look at them online. But you've also got Chambers Students, and you've got listings in websites like Legal Cheek, lawcareers.net, etc. Okay. And then it goes without saying, you need to pay attention to both the legal industry and national press. Okay. So the national press will be more about sort of business related news stories, whereas the legal press might involve, you reading an interview with a law firm's managing partner where they're talking about, their commitment to diversity or their commitment to climate change, etc. Sadly, quite a lot of content that's going to go into the level of detail which I'm hoping you're aiming for is sadly behind paywalls. But if your law school has given you access to, their corporate account where they've just, got passwords for as many students as, for students, then really take advantage of that. And then LinkedIn is really useful, interestingly, not so much for looking for a job, but it's useful for snooping on people. I use it to research the backgrounds of partners. So let's say, for example, you're looking to join a mid-sized sort of high street firm, okay? You will obviously see the partner profiles on the firm's website, which again will mostly be written in a positive way, which draws in clients in. But their LinkedIn profile will reveal things like how long have they been in that role for, how long have they been a partner for, where did they go to university, what school did they go to, and that tells you quite a bit about the sort of diverse or lack of diverse background of some of the senior lawyers in that firm, and you can form your own conclusion on what that means with regard to, their approach to diversity and whether culturally that's going to be, the place you want to, use as the platform to launch your legal career. So let's go into law firm rankings in a bit more detail. Rankings are critically important because for some students, you'll have already decided that you've got a practice area in mind that you want to be focusing on longer term once you qualify. So the best way to work out which firms are worth targeting would be to see which firms are world renowned or known locally for that area of law. Okay. So if you look for firms that are, let's say for argument's sake, okay, that you want to specialize in white collar crime. Okay. A really good starting point would be to look up what firms are highly ranked. So ranked 1 or 2 or 3rd for white collar crime. Okay. And how helpful would that be when you're talking about the why us question? Because now you can say that, you want to join firm X because you have a longer term goal to focus on white collar crime, and your firm is really highly ranked for this area of work. And I also, my research also revealed that you've recently won several awards for the work that you do, etc., etc. That sounds much better, doesn't it, than just say that I want to join your firm because I think it's, it would be a privilege to join the firm. I'm really passionate about joining your firm, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't work, okay? So Chambers and Legal 500 will rank firms by a broad mix of practice areas, but they'll also split that further into UK and then overseas jurisdictions, and within the UK regions. So, it's worth your while if you're looking at applying for regional firms, say in Birmingham or in Bristol, that you look at the regional rankings, because the way firms are ranked will be an overall ranking for the firm as in its entirety, and then within individual practice areas for the Northwest, for the Midlands, for the Southwest, etc. So it'll give you a really good flavour of how reputable a law firm is, okay? It will also give you a really good idea of who their competitors are, because if you've got 2 firms that are ranked number 1 for private equity, for example, then you know that they're going to see each other as competitors, and therefore, when you get asked that question, how do we differ from our competitors? You would at least have a good, start if you know who the competitors are. And this sounds basic, core principle stuff, but I've spoken to a lot of students and indeed junior lawyers who have said to me that, I've asked them, which other firms are you thinking of applying to if you're interested in private equity work or if you're interested in commercial disputes work? And they don't really know, or they'll give me a really eclectic mix of firms. And I'm like, well, there goes your argument for being a disputes lawyer out the window, because what you've told me just doesn't make sense. And therefore, if you do that in an interview, the partners will become slightly skeptical about whether you've done your homework and whether you're really serious about being a commercial disputes lawyer. Okay, let's look at financial results in a bit more detail. As I said, the one that I went for is headcount and the size of the trainee intake. And of course, they're really, really important because the overall size of an organization, whether that's an in-house legal team or a private practice law firm, will have a significant influence over culture, work-life balance, the type of work that you might attract as an organization, etc., as does the training intake. And also, the size of the organization might also have some sway over the amount of resources you get with regard to infrastructure around you. So a really large commercial law firm is more likely to have out-of-hours documents, sort of production support. They will have out-of-hours secretarial support, whereas a smaller law firm, if you were to ask about that, you would just get laughed out the building. Okay. Similarly, for me, this training intake size was important because I wanted to be in a bigger pool of trainees because I'd have, more choice over who I potentially sort of forge friendship groups with. Whereas you may find that a smaller training intake will create a more collegiate atmosphere. So that's where I think size with regard to the number of people is important. Okay. But revenue is also really helpful. Again, because what you're trying to do is work out from your research, what are a law firm's biggest practice areas? So let's use Linklaters as an example, okay? Because it's obviously a firm that I've trained at, I'm familiar with. Linklaters is a global law firm and it's full service. So full service means that it's got, lawyers specializing in pretty much every practice area you can think of within the commercial sphere. Okay, so you've got lawyers specializing in corporate, you've got lawyers specializing in banking, employment, competition law, litigation, financial services regulatory. They may even have lawyers specializing in environmental law, international arbitration. The list goes on, okay? Let's say that you've decided, though, that you want to work as an employment lawyer longer term because you really enjoyed your employment law module on your master's or on your undergrad degree, et cetera, or even on your LPC. If you look at the contribution Linklater's employment team makes to the firm's revenue pie and in turn its profit, you'll soon realize that applying to Linklaters and telling them that you want to be an employment lawyer would look like a bit of a mismatch, because it's quite a small portion of what the firm's overall sort of performance is like. Whereas if you apply to Linklaters saying that, you really want to be a transactional lawyer because you see yourself as someone who likes doing project management, you like that fast-paced environment, you want to work on high-profile deals, advising, brands that are household names, then you'll be applauded for that, because if you look at the breakdown of Linklaters revenue and the way Linklaters is ranked in the directories, you'll soon realize that corporate is quite a significant practice area for Linklaters. In fact, they would call it the jewel in its crown, sort of thing. So that's where you're looking. Whereas if you applied to a firm like Thompson's, which is very, very well known for claimant employment law work, and you said that you wanted to be an employment law lawyer, that's a pretty good match. So that's where looking at rankings and then what portion of the revenue is attributed to that practice area is a really good way of identifying target law firms and then matching your interests in specific practice areas with that firm. Okay, so that's why that's really important. Similarly, you can also look to see what are the biggest offices, because again, if a law firm's biggest office outside of London is Germany, and you're a German speaker, and the law firm also says in its grad rec literature that you will potentially, students who apply to us and secure training contracts could do a secondment to Germany, and you happen to do law in German at uni and you can speak German, well, frankly, that's worth highlighting in your application forms. So it really is as simple as that, matching what you can offer and what you're interested in with what the law firm can offer you. Okay, so other clues to look out for, and I think financial health is really important. I'm not suggesting that a firm you apply to is suddenly going to go bust, but it's worth, thinking about what direction this firm is going in, because the firm you end up having on your CV is going to, really have quite a potentially large impact on the trajectory your career takes longer term. So that's why, and all of this also helps with a law firm's reputation and whether they are the right firm to gun for. Reputation is really important to you, and that's, again, a personal choice. So things to look out for are, law firms opening in new jurisdictions or, within new areas within the UK, office closures, partner or team hires is obviously really helpful. NQ retention rates. Now, be careful about that, because what's happening now is not necessarily reflective of what will happen when you qualify. And I think the NQ retention rates can be a bit misleading as to what a firm does with its trainees, because, we don't know whether some of those NQs were just let go because they were rubbish, or whether that was just a particularly challenging year for a law firm. So it should be a consideration, but I don't think it's necessarily a deal breaker, and you shouldn't let it overly influence your choice in which firms to apply to if the other factors that are important to you are present among, within those firms. And then obviously look out for stories regarding salaries and salary freezes, because if money is important to you, then obviously paying attention to salaries is going to be extremely helpful. I'll just pause for a moment just to see if any more questions come in. There have been quite a lot. So what I might do is let me just see if there are any. Okay, so there are some to do the research. So what I'll do is let's go back to the questions, because I think it's going to take me longer to read them one by one and then keep coming back to my slides. So I will allow 10 minutes at the end to go through all the questions. Okay, let's talk about events quickly. As I said, they have their limits, but it's obviously a really good opportunity to build on your knowledge that you've already developed through your desk-based research. And if it's an event like a law fair, for example, you will go in and feel far more confident when talking to representatives, because you've done that sort of initial background research, okay? But you'll find, though, that a lot of events are fronted by trainees or graduate recruitment officers. So you'll find that, for me, those types of events, unless it's something specifically being hosted by partners talking about the work they do, that it's really going to be, therefore, an opportunity to learn about recruitment processes, so timelines, whether they have blind CVs or whether they do contextualized recruitment. And then you can learn about training contract structures. How many seats do they do? Do they have any seats at all? Is a secondment guaranteed? And then obviously you can find out a bit more about the culture and the people. But that's not so much them telling you about the culture and people, although it's worth asking. But it's also about, what vibe did you get off that person when you spoke to them? Were they friendly? Did they come across as approachable? What was their background? Were they super posh, or were they quite diverse? How does that relate to what you want and what your background is, or compare? Okay, so as I said, really useful for that type of background information, but less useful when it comes to the sort of nitty-gritty stuff about law firms, because the panelists are likely to be on message. So let's talk about networking and one-to-one meetings. Be mindful of networking conversations and not monopolizing the individual you're speaking to. Networking is all about brief chats, okay? It's about developing that initial connection with someone and then ending the conversation by hopefully agreeing to stay in contact with each other, so you can then do that all important follow-up so that you can then have the one-to-one meeting. And think about whether it's appropriate to ask about things like visa status and sponsorship if you're talking to a trainee at a networking event, because they just won't know the answer to that. So make sure that it's light touch, the question is appropriate for the person you're speaking to. And if it's something more complex and it's actually a call to the graduate recruitment team, offline, then that would be a far more appropriate way to get that question answered, okay? So, as I said, the one-to-one meetings are really what you should be able to sort of set up, either with people you already know or people you've met at these events, or people you could potentially be introduced to through people you already know. And that's where you can do a bit more of a deep dive into, someone's day-to-day responsibilities, their positive and negative experiences of being a lawyer, what they like about the practice area they specialize in, and, what they like about working at the firm they're at. And you may find that some of these one-to-one meetings are actually facilitated by the law firm you interview with, or you attend an assessment centre with, so that you can then have that warts and all conversation, especially in the event that you end up with more than one offer. And as far as I'm concerned, don't go into these one-to-one conversations on a whim or, casually thinking, I'll just have a bit of a catch-up. These might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunities where you only get one shot at impressing that individual and gleaning the relevant information from them. So do your preparation. Think, what do I need to be equipped with by the time this conversation is put to bed? And ask open questions that you've pre-prepared in advance. So by open questions, what I mean is questions starting with, please, can you tell me about, what are your thoughts or views? How do I, rather than should I? Because anything that involves a yes or no means that you might get a yes and a no answer. I've deliberately left the word why off the list for open questions, because I've done some real thinking about the word why and questions starting with why. And depending on your manner and approach to these conversations, sometimes I find the word why can come across as being a bit confrontational. So why should I join your firm? I think a far more polite way of asking the same question is, can you please tell me about your firm? Or what type of lawyers do you think would flourish at your firm? You see how that will, you'll extract the same information from the person, but it's far better for rapport building and showing, that you're inquisitive and interested rather than cocky and why should I join your firm because I'm going to get offers from 3 others. It can come across as being a bit standoffish. Okay, so this is an acronym that I came across recently. It's not one that I've used myself, but I thought it sums it up nicely in terms of what you should be doing when researching employers. And this is really on the basis of conversations you're having either at law fairs or on a one-to-one basis. Okay, so the recap is really sort of recapping. It's doing a quick summary of yourself. The explore is asking those open questions that I've just highlighted and giving you some examples of. And the aim of the game, of course, is to make sure that you leave the conversation, equipped with all the information you need to know before you can proceed with an application form or before you're, able to go off and feel interview ready or assessment center ready. Okay. By the way, all of the stuff that I've described, you should be doing it pre-application stage and then refreshing your mind and developing your knowledge deeper when you get to the interview and assessment center stage. So this isn't something you just do on a whim, one-off for 5 minutes just before you attend an event or before you attend an assessment center. This is something you're doing fairly regularly, because then you'll develop a really deep knowledge of the information you need to have, on tap. And then I like the next step point, because you should aim to end. Sorry, the excellence is, the question that the way the question you could ask is, what type of individuals really flourished in your organization, or what would be the top 3 qualities you look for when shortlisting candidates to join your team? Okay, so that will give you some clues on, what are the key competencies or skills that's really important to that employer. Okay, so that's the excellent. The action piece, I think, is really important, because what you should do is never ever end a networking conversation, if you can, with the book closed. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, the action should be, it would be great to stay in contact with you. Perhaps we can pick up in a few weeks, over the summer when I start attending assessment centres. It could be really helpful talking to you. It'd be great to get your input on my CV. Can I please send that to you for a quick glance? If you have a quick glance and give me maybe top 3 suggestions to change it. Or, this is my favourite, fantastic speaking to you. Who else could you introduce me to so that I could continue the conversation? So it's who else rather than can you introduce me? Because can you introduce me will probably result in a no. Who else is likely to at least get you one name and hopefully an introduction. But at worst, you'll get a name. And then you might need to be a bit more resourceful to work out how you're going to make contact with that individual. Okay. So the ideal case scenario is they're going to introduce you to someone else. So you keep building your network that way on a one-to-one basis, rather than through the sort of haphazard method of going to lots of events. And the other question should be, if you were me, what would be the next step for me to move my, chances of securing a training contract forward positively? Or what should I be doing next to make sure that I graduate from my degree with a high 2-1 or a first? Okay. So, everything to do with career planning, as far as I'm concerned, is about, mini goals and actions that you need to take within a fixed time frame. Okay. And then, the linked bit really reinforces the action point, as I mentioned, which is, who else can you be linked to as part of your research? Okay. And that's really the key bit, because that's how I've grown my network, through referrals and recommendations, rather than sending blind LinkedIn connection requests, with no personalized message, which I find instantly off-putting and typically don't reply to. So let's just, whilst we're on the subject of LinkedIn, this is my final slide, by the way, and then I will go straight into questions. So LinkedIn, as I said, is a really good way to, research the backgrounds of, well, firstly, you can find who works at your target firms. It's really quite easy to do. Then you can research, as I said earlier, backgrounds and career pathways, and even interests. I'll give you an example. Recently, I was talking to the director of business development at the London office of a top New York law firm, and he said that he was going to have a virtual coffee with a prospective client, and he looked up that client on LinkedIn, and he noticed that that individual was posting quite a lot of stuff about a particular sort of charity that he's been involved in as a non-executive director, and then doing a bit of fundraising work, et cetera, including climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Okay. All of that for, my BD director was fantastic material to come up with icebreaker questions to get the person you're meeting to talk about themselves. So he simply said, I noticed that you did a challenge to climb on top of Mount Kilimanjaro. How did that go? I mean, how impressed is that individual going to be that you've done the research, you've asked a question, taken an interest in that individual? And that's just by watching someone's LinkedIn activities, and not just necessarily their profile, but also what are they posting about? What sort of ignites a fire in their belly? What are they talking about on social media? Okay. And, the other point is about the culture, because again, looking at people's backgrounds and is helpful to see how diverse an organization this law firm is, or in-house legal department. But then the actual corporate LinkedIn page will probably no doubt include updates and posts on things like culture, values, mission statements, et cetera, et cetera. So that should be supplemented with looking at the law firm's websites. And there you go. As if by magic, I've got 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to launch straight into questions because they're coming in thick and fast. I'm just going to extend my screen so that I can actually see the questions in full. Okay, so the first one is, because I heard that now solicitors have to bring their own clients. How would they do that? Would they have to do their own prospecting? Would trainees need to build a prospecting list of clients? The simple answer is, in a large commercial law firm, absolutely not. As I highlighted, it's understanding what the firm's key clients are. Are there any sectors that they're trying to grow their work in? Especially, for example, if you're a career changer and you're familiar with people who are local business owners, et cetera, then that's a great thing to mention in your application forms. But as a trainee, you wouldn't really be expected to bring your own clients. I would think that it's a nice to have, but certainly not a deal breaker. Let's go to the next one, which is, should we assume all companies that are on a firm's news pages are their clients? You can do, but I think what's going to be more relevant is, what are their recent press releases saying about the work they're doing and which clients they're working for? Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to use examples from the work, from a law firm's website, read clients, read work they're involved in, read office launches, etc., it's got to be quite recent. So there's no point in talking about an office that launched 5 years ago. Recent has to be in the past 12 months, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so let's go to this one. How do you best network with firms if you're based abroad? I think I've touched upon this already. It's through the virtual events. And networking, as far as I'm concerned, does not have to mean that you're physically in the same room as the person you're speaking to. It can happen through Zoom, it can happen through Teams. And so it's really about making sure you have the confidence to reach out to people in the first place. And that's where, if you can get someone to introduce you, that's going to be far more effective. But failing that, if you go down the LinkedIn connection request route, try to personalize the message. As to what, and also, as far as I'm concerned, don't be greedy when asking contacts for favors, because a bit of audacity is helpful, because you've got to be brave and bold and go for it, because if you don't ask, you don't get. Because ask yourself, what's the worst that's going to happen? The person might just ignore your request. But it's also worth asking, is what I'm asking reasonable based on who this person is, so on and so forth, okay? Because I think that if too much audacity can be really off-putting, but some is important because you need to step out of your comfort zone when it comes to job search techniques. Okay, so let's go for this one. Which would be a good place to look up the law firm rankings and the respective regional rankings? As I've said, the Chambers and Legal 500 are the main directories in the UK, and you'll get the regional versions. So they'll go by regions within the UK. So whether that's the Northwest, Southwest, Midlands, I think we've also got East Anglia. So that's where you would look. And you'll find that a firm will be ranked overall by region, but then also there'll be further rankings relating to individual practice areas. And it's worth taking quite a holistic approach so that you consider both the regional sort of rankings as well as the practice areas, because that will give you a clearer idea of where this firm is heading. Because the other thing, talking about sort of rankings, is you'll find for some practice areas in London, there'll be rankings based on big ticket deals. So let's use private equity again as an example. So in private equity, you'll have the mega deals, and then you'll have mid-market private equity. So you'll get rankings for firms that are really well known for the £1 billion private equity sort of mergers and acquisitions. Then you've got the firms that are known for the mid-market, which will be, probably £1 million upwards. So usually sort of 100 million to 250 million. Then you've got the sort of smaller firms that do the sort of, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of deals, et cetera, et cetera. But you'll find that the rankings are going to be more appropriate for the commercial type firms. But then you will get, smaller high street firms are probably going to be more difficult to research in the directories or in the legal press because they're less likely to feature in them. But that's where the local newspapers might be helpful, or talking to people locally within the town that you live in. I know, for example, I grew up in Luton, and I know without even doing any research one of the 5 biggest law firms in Luton. And it's worth, let's not just neglect these smaller regional firms or high street firms, because, when I was training to be a lawyer, or when I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, I actually started really small. I started gaining work experience in the first instance with local law firms in Luton. So they should feature in your job hunting plan, so to speak, as a potential target to get your foot in the door, so to speak. Let's go to oh no, that was just a lovely thank you message. So let's go to this one. Okay, so perhaps a question you could leave for the end, which we're nearly approaching, so there you go, perfect. I would like to hear your opinion on how you found it working for a big corporate law firm. If you could choose again, would you have opted for a different firm or a smaller, less corporate environment? Okay, really lovely question. I think that I liked being in a corporate environment because what was really lovely about being in a large law firm is that it had a very corporate, sort of like international vibe, because Linklaters had lots of overseas offices. And I remember going into the staff canteen, which is called Silks, and it's still called Silks. That you'd go there and you'd hear people speaking in different languages. And it was quite a fast-paced environment. And when I compare it to doing work experience in a local law firm in Luton, which felt a lot more sleepy, I did think that fast-paced international environment was more for me. And I was surrounded by lots of super bright individuals. But what is an area that's quite difficult to reconcile is fast-paced plus work-life balance. And I also made the decision that I would be a transactional lawyer because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I specialized in mergers and acquisitions. So with hindsight, do I think I would have fared better in a smaller law firm? Perhaps not, because I don't know culturally whether that was right for me. Should I perhaps chosen an advisory practice area where the work was slightly slower paced? Possibly. But do I regret training at Linklaters? Absolutely not. Has it given me a fantastic platform to go off and do other things? Yes. And it's actually worth mentioning at this point that the law firm you join as a trainee doesn't necessarily have to be the law firm that you spend your entire career at. I know that if you're anything like me, you may be thinking that, because I certainly did. When I started applying for training contracts, I thought it had to be the best, it had to be the biggest, because I want to be the best lawyer that I can possibly become. And for me, it was just like, a big law firm or nothing. Whereas lots of people end up at places like Linklaters or the bigger sort of like, New York law firms, etc., or even the Silver Circle, as a lateral move. So they might do that at 2 years post-qualified. So you don't need to think that you're going to spend your entire career at the same organization. But having a reputable firm to start with does keep your options more open. That I do think is fact. Right, let's go to the next one. I'm doing commercial law co-curricular. Will this help in my application forms? Yeah, if you're doing commercial law as a module or something on the side, and you're enjoying it, and you've got good examples of work and lessons learned from doing that work, then yes, absolutely, that could be a reason for saying that's why you're interested in working in a commercial law firm environment. We've got about a minute to go, so I could possibly take one more question if anyone has anything. Oh, sorry, I think I misunderstood the question. Will this help with commercial awareness? The long and short of it is commercial awareness. It's a shame. I don't know whether you listened in on my presentation earlier this month. Commercial awareness is not something you just say on an application form. You don't just say, I'm good at commercial awareness because I've done a commercial law module. It's more about being interested in commercial issues and also being able to demonstrate that you're commercial. So you can use your commercial law sort of experience as a reason for being interested in the commercial sphere. And that's what I meant about helping with application forms. But you don't need to ever say, I'm commercially aware on an application form. What they will do is they'll test your commercial awareness by asking you the question I highlighted earlier, which is, can you give us an example of a recent story that you've been following? Does that help, Rizwana? She said that makes perfect sense, so hopefully that's answered your question. And I think, by the way, if you missed my commercial awareness session, then it is available on the Barbary website, so you just go and look at it there. It's really worth listening to. I'm obviously a bit biased because I ran the presentation, but it does have quite an interesting angle and take on what commercial awareness is. And I've used loads of examples on how you can do that. Okay, so we are overrunning, but I'm going to just take a couple of questions. So how do you add depth when mentioning a firm's awards? Don't over-egg it. It'll be a bit vomit-inducing. Use it in combination with other reasons that you're interested in a firm, and make sure that award is really, connected to a practice area that's a priority for the firm. So yes, make references to it, but you don't need to sort of go into too much detail. And then should you pick reference? Yes, of course you should. But it's really about identifying who's going to give you the best references, because asking for references is a really big deal. And some people don't like sticking their head above the parapet, or they might say that the official policy is that we don't give references or we only give two-liners. So I'm afraid it's quite a complex topic, and I'm not going to be able to go into too much detail. But yes, if you can, somehow match your referees with the types of firms you're applying to, then yes, you should. Great. Okay, so that's me done. This was the third and final webinar as part of this series that Cheeky Little Careers has done in collaboration with Barbary. Again, I'd like to thank Barbary for hosting the sessions, both in terms of the platform that we're using at the moment, and also for hosting the recorded versions of these webinars, which you'll be able to access for a few more weeks yet. So if you haven't listened to the previous two that I've done, then it's certainly worth your while going and digging them up and having a listen. And if you aren't following Cheeky Little Careers on LinkedIn, do so. If you want to put a LinkedIn post about how helpful you found this, then please do so. We're a fledgling website and looking to grow our brand, and any support we can get will be much appreciated. So all I'm going to say now is, stay well, good luck with your application forms, and, keep at it. Thank you very much.